In the mid-1800s, the Victorian public were confronted with something so immense, so gargantuan, it was ridiculed in the press for being way too overambitious. It was the dream of an incredible designer, the culmination of his brilliant career, and when it first loomed over the top hats and bonnets of the British aristocracy and admiralty, you could forgive them for feeling just a little bit uneasy. It was the vast black iron hulk of the SS Great Eastern. Now, it's difficult to convey just how huge a leap forward this thing was. Let me put it to you in cold, hard numbers. In 1840, the biggest ship in the world was the SS President at 2,366 gross registered tons. Then came the Great Britain 3 years later at 3,270, and the Otranto, about 200 tons bigger a decade later, and then finally, in 1857, the SS Adriatic at 3,670 gross registered tons. Now, the very next year, along came the Great Eastern, 18,915. An insane outlier, a construction project so big her bulk wouldn't be exceeded until the next century. This was the pinnacle of Victorian engineering. But just how did they do it? In an age before computers and CAD software and all of that, how on earth did they design the biggest ship in the world? Well, fortunately, some of the original plans still exist, and we met just the guy to show them to us.
My name is Andrew Chung, and I'm one of the curators of historic photographs, ships plans, and technical records at the National Maritime Museum Greenwich.
Andrew has, objectively, one of the coolest jobs in the world, working closely with the monstrously large archive and collection held by Royal Museums Greenwich in London, not too far from where Great Eastern herself was built. I was invited to visit Andrew and his team and explore the archive, looking at incredible hand-drawn prints that are now over 160 years old.
Britain in 1860 was benefiting a great deal from the fruits of the Industrial Revolution, which had really begun to show their initial signs towards the end of the Napoleonic Wars. And by about the 1850s, lots of things were beginning to feed into the field of maritime technology that were going to change it irrevocably. So wood as a medium for construction was still very worthwhile, but iron was beginning to prove its worth. It opened up new possibilities. You could build bigger ships. And of course, no vessel expressed this greater than Great Eastern. Other people were saying, well, you could probably increase a vessel by up to a third, and Brunel evidently went, oh, no, I'm going to do it much, much larger than that. In fact, I'll need 2 shipyards side by side to build this monster. Steam power was offering new possibilities too. Not only were you no longer dependent on the vagaries of the wind and weather, to a degree you could now control when you sailed. You didn't have to pay as much attention to conditions as you had to previously, and you could now propel larger and heavier ships, which offered more chances for profit. Bigger ships, more cargo space, more passenger space. And these benefits attracted a lot of investment in the new technology. So it was a very exciting period where things were beginning to change very rapidly and new tech was popping up all the time. The difficulty, of course, was a lot of this new tech was not all that reliable yet. It was very much a work in progress. But also, when you're an investor with such a range of options in front of you, it's very difficult to know who to back and who not to back. And so Great Eastern appears in the middle of this period of excitement and opportunity as a wonderful chance for an investment, something that could take passengers effortlessly around the globe without having to refuel. But then at the same time, it's an enormous risk.
This heady age drove some incredible technological progress and pushed just about every boundary there was. Suddenly, the sky was the limit. But iron construction projects began their lives on paper as skilled draftsmen and engineers worked around the clock to plot out some of the most incredible construction projects ever accomplished by humanity.
So here we have our much prized drawings of Brunel's Great Eastern. Now, if you're wondering why I'm not wearing gloves, because people often ask me this, it's because current thinking has gone a bit full circle on this issue. And while gloves are still often worn in various archives, including ours, The thinking at the moment is that the gloves can actually contribute towards contaminant and dirt transference. So the really important thing is to have clean hands. Don't have anything sticky and then handle an artifact. So it's basically common sense.
So, what are we looking at?
So this is the lower sectional plan, as they call this deck of the Great Eastern. Some might call it the orlop or the platform deck, depending on what sort of terminology you prefer. I'm just going to turn a corner of this up so that you can see this is on cartridge paper. And there you have the linen backing, and you can give it a feel to get the texture. So this drawing was obviously designed to last a heck of a long time. So this is a copy taken from the John Scott Russell originals, and you've got everything proportionally as it should be, but just with an incredible amount of decor overlaid on top of it. So we've got individual lumps of coal in the bunkers, which I find is a crazy amount of detail. Someone took an awful lot of trouble about this. The individual deck planking is picked out. You've got the shadows. They've decided what direction the light's coming from. They're being a tiny bit optimistic about how bright it would be down at this part of the ship.
Central to this, it's impossible not to notice. Everything here is dedicated to what's going on here and here.
Yeah. So here we've actually landed in quite a nice spot, because you've got roughly the center of the paddle wheel mechanism, which would have extended about one level above and all the rest of it down to the bottom of the ship. You've also got the engines driving the ship's screw propeller, so all the important engineering side is here. You've got the centrally placed boilers, and you have the immense amount of coal that Brunel factored in for getting the ship, in theory, all the way from Britain to Australia non-stop. Now, I still wonder whether his sums were right on that one, but given everything he achieved in his life and how often he got things right, I probably shouldn't doubt him, really.
Great Eastern's designer, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, was a giant in the world of engineering. He was self-made, disciplined, and absolutely pioneering, from railways and dockyards, tunnels and bridges, and finally onto steamships. But for this visionary, it hadn't always been easy going.
Brunel's an incredibly complicated man, and his motives are sometimes difficult to pin down, but I personally feel about him that he was always driven by a desire to achieve and to explore and to push boundaries. Now, he wasn't a terribly well man, and I don't know whether that fed into his psychological drive to prove himself, but he evidently knew himself, he knew his talents, and he knew that he could always build bigger, better. Yes, it's a very positive form of overcompensation, isn't it? I'm going to really play to my strengths, and I'm going to get out there and do this. And the more people look at me in a worried way and say this is not actually possible, I'm going, no, it is possible, and here is the physical proof. In the maritime field, he'd already proven himself with the SS Great Britain, which was a very successful ship. And building on the strength of that, you can see how he's gone, right, I've done this amazing thing, I've solved this particular problem, and I've proven new technologies. How can I make this bigger? How can I push yet another boundary? Of course, as we know, even genius has its limits, and in many respects, Great Eastern seems to have been the one innovation that took it out of him in more ways than one. Of course, ultimately probably ended up killing him.
Pushing boundaries is what Brunel was all about. He supposedly said, "I am opposed to the laying down of rules or conditions to be observed in the construction of bridges, lest the progress of improvement tomorrow might be embarrassed or shackled by recording or registering as law the prejudices or errors of today." But, as an obsessive pioneer, the drive for progress sent him to an early grave. He never got to see Great Eastern completed, and when you study the incredible plans of his mammoth ship, you can kind of understand why.
Two things strike me above all others, particularly with plans in the mid-19th century onwards, and the first of these is the sheer amount of mathematical, scientific knowledge that is on display. And it is matched by this incredible artistic execution, which is completely unnecessary in a working drawing when you're designing a ship. But I personally, and I think a lot of other people, are very grateful that they put it in. There's various levels to it. On the one hand, if you're a shipyard, you want to advertise in the most beautiful possible way. So your ship science, if I can call it that, is cloaked in this remarkably beautiful piece of artwork, but it still retains its functionality as a working drawing. But at the same time, it's very much the spirit of the age. The Victorians really loved their decor, and you see it in the naval sphere as well as the civilian. Prior to HMS Warrior, the Navy of the Wooden Walls draws pretty functional plans, and then they build their first iron-hulled, iron-plated warship, and the level of decoration, they just go to town with it. And Great Eastern is very much part of that movement, where there's a pride in what they're doing, and it's reflected in the embellishment. But there's also a practical purpose behind it, which I find quite clever, and it's involved in the training of apprentices and assistants. So if you're an apprentice draftsman in this period, you have to prove that you understand how to draw properly while you're learning the complicated math that goes into this sort of thing. And a big part of an apprentice's training, before you were allowed to do any of the serious drawing, you had to prove you could handle a brush properly. So many of them would spend their time just decorating these gorgeous plans that a naval architect working in the same office would have drawn. And then one day they get to do their own design work, but they carry this incredible skill set over with them. And this tradition flourishes for decades. So I personally view the high point of this level of decorativeness as being from about the 1860s up to about 1920. And thereafter, reality begins to set in a big way. You actually see it a bit before, as some designs around the turn of the century become more functional, more straightforward. But once you get past about the 1950s, it really begins to disappear altogether.
These void sort of spaces, fore and aft, were these cargo? What were?
It was cargo down here. The only bit that they've jammed in there is part of the chain locker for the ship's anchor cables. But yes, you would have had usually dry cargo jammed in everywhere you could, and you can just about see the blades of the ship's propeller showing there. But the mounting is partially obscured by, I think that's the rudder head.
And the stem, amazing. I mean, this is such a monumental project for its time. I mean, this resembles the layout of ships from 50 or 60 years into the future, like, you know, Lusitania and Mauritania, where you've got all these bunkers, and of course, noticeably 5 funnels.
Yes, yes. It, as you rightly say, is an incredible feature there. So, yeah, the bases of all 5 of her funnels, and as a technological achievement, she's just amazing. You can see the double hull there. So that's what you've got here. Effectively, they've created what in the real ship would have been a fairly impressive carpenter's walk, with the inner plating forming the longitudinal bulkhead of the boiler, coal bunkers, and then you've got the ship's outer plating there, and there would have been enough space for people to traverse that if they needed to. It's just the scale of this vessel is so mind-boggling, and as you say, she in some respects is the blueprint for the later liners, insofar as Brunel's showing everyone what's possible. So, guys, this is what we can do with iron. Look how big this thing is. And I find it amazing to try and visualize it, because I suppose at 1:96 scale, a double-decker bus would probably be about that long in comparison to this gigantic thing here.
What did Victorians think when they first saw this thing steaming into harbour?
I think overall there was a huge wave of approval, because you were living, I mean, there would have been many doubters while she was being built, but when she was actually underway, and if you saw I should properly say, if you saw this Leviathan for the first time, it ticks all the right boxes for Victorians: bigger, better, faster. It's just another example of Britain's seemingly inexorable progress towards greater and greater things. And I think this is particularly true if one sees her in the context of the very first trial runs in the early days before it was realised that she was going to be a complete commercial flop in terms of the Australia run. But then she makes this incredible comeback because as a transatlantic cable layer, she's the best thing since sliced bread. She's got the cargo capacity. A huge area like this, you could have a gigantic reel of cable, which you can then feed up through the cargo hatches, and it's run along the upper deck as you lay it. And she's got so much stowage space, she can run the Atlantic and just lay a telegraph cable. It's incredible. No other ship is capable of doing this at that time.
Of course, I mean, we would almost now look at that as like an ignominious end to a career, but you know, the transatlantic cable is itself a huge technological boom for the time.
Yes, it is the Victorian internet, really, isn't it? It's and so she plays a pivotal role in linking us with the United States and with other places. And yes, she not only is she a precursor to the great liners of the 20th century, she is she lays the proto-internet in a very important respect.
Building a monster like Great Eastern was certainly not easy, and her sheer size meant even just launching her into the water would be an engineering triumph all its own. Just across from the Greenwich Maritime Museum, you can still see the exact slipway that launched the ship. Today, the Thames is dotted with apartment high-rises and converted warehouses, but back then it was a very different place, at the very centre of one of the greatest technological upheavals in all of human history.
London had a lot of attractions. One of them was that was where the technology was going at the time. So the Scottish yards were developing very quickly, and there were some in northern England that were beginning to appear too, but they were still in a very early stage of their development. And one of the problems they had was that because London had all the investment and the money, a lot of the best inventors tended to go down to London to seek investment. And although they were facing the same challenges in terms of finding yards that could be modernized and expanded, it was just so much easier in London because they had so much more industrial infrastructure on site. Now, the fact that this picture dramatically changes less than 50 years later sometimes obscures the fact that in the 1840s, in the 1850s, if you were wanting to build large steam vessels, then London was really the place to go at that time. The one thing I could add is one problem that London was showing, and you sort of see it with the tale of Great Eastern and the unexpected expansion of her building yard, is that in London you have very little places to go. The traditional yards are already hemmed in by people's houses and other buildings and the commercial wharves, so you can't really do a straight expansion of your yard beyond a certain point. The very last one to do it successfully is C.J. Mayer and then latterly Thames Ironworks, who opened their new premises on the Isle of Dogs, which at the time is largely open land. But even they, by the 1880s, 1890s, are finding that they've got nowhere to go anymore because London is growing so fast. And it's a very expensive and awkward business asking people if they'd mind moving house so you could demolish their tenements and expand your shipyard.
For a time, Great Eastern introduced innovations and design advancements that we might take for granted now, but which were absolutely revolutionary at the time. Looking at the plans, you get a real sense that hundreds and hundreds of hours were sunk into the interior layout and passenger comforts alone. Before then, passenger ships had looked like this inside, dreary, drab, and damp. In 1842, Charles Dickens had travelled to America on another steamship of the time, and he had likened the thing to a gigantic hearse and complained of terrible discomfort, rolling in bad weather, and horrendous food. Yikes. Great Eastern set out to change all of this, and with her sheer size, there came many benefits.
I think what this really shows you was the huge volume of the ship's hull.
Yes.
As well as how much of it is dedicated to machinery spaces. But you get these brilliant double height decks.
Yes, yeah, light, airy, and very, very spacious. I think the concept was you were supposed to completely forget that you were on a ship, which is probably one of the earliest expressions of that attitude, which I think has become commonplace for liners now. But Brunel, I mean, other than Bessemer's rather unfortunate effort that didn't really go anywhere, Brunel really wanted this idea that you could travel in superb comfort, at least if you were first or second class passengers. It was a bit earthier if you were paying for the immigrant's berth, and you'd have to put up with a plain bunk over there. But yes, here it's a completely different story, as you say. Double height compartments, especially in the main communal areas. Lots of comfort, lots of beauty, lots of paneling. It's very much of its time, but I don't think anyone had worked quite this much grandeur into a liner before this. So again, it was setting a new trend that people would struggle to follow. Also, how's this for the worst possible job for a chimney sweep? You've got the ladder rungs built into the insides of the funnels. And,
It's only about a 10-story climb.
yeah.
How are you with heights?
Not that good.
Me neither. Unreal. So the general layout is obviously first class, centrally located. Is great because this is the pivot point that the ship's going to be moving around.
Yes. Yeah.
Was she a two-class ship?
She was a two-class ship, yes. So you get slightly less luxury further down, and the accommodation varied a bit in its detail. We'll see that in one of the deck plans. But effectively, to be honest, anyone who travelled on any other ship in this period would find nothing to complain about on Great Eastern. She was. She basically set a whole new bar in terms of maritime travel, and long distance maritime travel at that. And you can see why so much cargo space is needed too, because people undertaking a voyage of that duration, quite a few of them would probably not be coming back anytime soon or had no intention of returning, so a lot of worldly goods would be going with them. And then you've also got to allow for foodstuffs, because if the idea is the ship's able to make it all that way without stopping unless she absolutely has to, then you've got to allow for that as well. These tanks here are actually fresh water. And you see them repeated back here too.
We should touch on Brunel's kind of obsession with safety, because I think the other thing that this view gives you is this brilliant perspective of keel to boat deck, watertight bulkheads.
Yeah.
Now, this is standard today, but as we know, after the Great Eastern for a while there, it was not, and bulkheads only rose so far up in the hull, about halfway, and obviously that led to some shocking disasters. Pioneering maritime safety stuff is happening here, right?
Absolutely, yes. As you say, most people didn't do this. Even the Navy didn't do this. So you look at Warrior, which is admittedly much more diminutive and completed a couple of years after Great Eastern. She only has one bulkhead that makes an attempt at being a watertight bulkhead. Other than that, she's wide open. And yet here you have a civilian vessel being built stronger than a lot of warships out there. And not just the intrinsic strength of the hull, but you've got the double bottom, you've got the watertight bulkheads that extend all the way from keel to deck. This is going to be a very hard ship to sink if anyone's ever tempted to try. And the strength of the construction, the quality of the construction is actually borne out when she comes to the end of her life. The sheer effort of breaking her up is monumental. It's a bit of a cliche, but the Victorians certainly knew how to put them together. Taking them apart was a bit of a chore. And I understand that quite a bit of her bottom plating is still there because they just got to that bit and just thought, do you know what, this is... The resale value of the scrap is just not going to be worth this job, so we're just going to leave it. But I'm very glad of that, because it does mean that there is a bit of Great Eastern still out there that nobody can really be bothered to do anything with. But it preserves a bit of her. If ever a ship deserved to be a museum ship one day, it really was this one.
Someone's in agreement.
Yeah, thank you.
The skill of the designers on show here is mind-boggling, even moving. The task of actually drawing the ship to this degree of detail and accuracy was as impressive a task as building the thing at all.
So you would have a set of rules of various different types. Most draftsmen were using French curves by the time that Great Eastern was designed, and it was probably a good thing too, because of course any plan drawn to imperial measurements are going to be quite large. The Admiralty and many British civilian shipbuilders decided they rather liked 1:48 as a scale, and they maintained this for as long as they humanly could. Some of the largest plans in our collection are pushing beyond 20 feet in length because of this dogged adherence to 1:48. It's the way forward. That lasts until about the 1920s, and then reason kicks in, although there are exceptions before then, as we'll see. But as a draftsman, you worked really long hours. You were often given a fairly short turnaround time for the drawing, because at the end of the day, time is money. You have to take a great deal of care over these plans. You've been presented with figures that your drawings have to adhere to, your body plans, your shear lines, everything has to match up. And in this period, a vast amount of detail is expected. Working with iron particularly demands this level of accuracy, because unlike the era of the wooden walls, if you make a mistake with a wooden component, there are ways of fixing it without necessarily having to discard the entire component. When you're dealing with iron and later steel components that have been specifically forged and cast and created, if you make a serious error, it's very, very hard to come back from that, and the whole component has to be redone. So you've got that weighing on your mind, you've got your time limits. As you say, the working conditions were often very uncomfortable in the middle of the 19th century. Your illumination wasn't great. You were sometimes limited by available space. And you had to make darn sure that your hands didn't shake after a while from exhaustion or whatever reason. You had to get those long strokes absolutely perfect, because if you did make a mistake, your options for correcting the plan were really quite limited, and in the worst case, you'd have to scrap the drawing and start again. And that must have been heartbreaking. Yep, so we have fore and aft steam-driven capstans, which was an incredible innovation for this period because pretty much no merchant ship had these. And the Navy understood the technology behind them, but there was still very much this attitude in the 1860s that sticking your capstan bar in and having a proper workout made a real man out of you. But I think the problem that Great Eastern had was that it simply wasn't efficient. The anchors you needed to be able to keep this ship in place were just of such a size. You'd have needed a load of men around the capstans. You probably would have needed a third capstan on another deck, and every man who can stick a bar in, probably 3 or 4 to a bar, just to get it moving. I think to Brunel's mind as an engineer, you know, never mind all the machismo about proper men bringing anchors up. It was a problem that he could solve very elegantly. I've got these extremely powerful engines in the ship. I've got enough capacity to raise enough steam for smaller engines. And I'm a Victorian engineer. I love engines, so I'm going to stick these in. And there we go. So I think much to the crew's relief, you could still have capstan bars in them, as you can see from the holes for them, but steam-driven anchor winches.
Big job otherwise.
A very big job otherwise. It's nice to be able to just, you know, let the machine do the work for you.
You're right. That's amazing that this is geared all the way down, 150 feet, maybe 20 feet forward to an auxiliary steam engine here? Is that right?
Yeah, they would have had a smaller donkey boiler feeding the steam power in, and yeah.
That's insane. Of course, 50 years later they'll have dedicated miniature expansion steam engines under the poop and the forecastle of big liners. It's just amazing seeing the thinking here that, well, no, we can just gear it.
Yeah.
Almost like, those steam workshops where you've got one long shaft from engine all the way through, and then you can plug things in as you need them.
Yeah. I mean, I've never seen any correspondence specifically relating to this, but you're right to highlight the sheer distance, because even though this technology existed and was understood at the time, even if nobody really wanted to use it, it's just the ambition behind, well, I know it's, the equivalent of a small merchant ship space, but just stick another gear on it or an extra length of steel, and it's fine. It'll work out properly. And apparently they never had any problems with it. So
I mean, there must have been a heck of a lot of force and torque on that shaft to be able to run, and it's the same here. It's running all the way forward.
Yeah, and it's good that he's managed to avoid the passenger spaces because, of course, and this makes sense from a maintenance perspective, it's running exposed across the deck there. So this would very much be a crew space only.
Just don't trip.
Don't trip. Yes.
Technological breakthroughs are one thing, but where the Great Eastern really shines through is in her palatial passenger spaces. For the time, these were just about unthinkable in their scale and their beauty, and they're all lovingly represented in full colour, right down to the last ceramic tile on these magnificent, huge plans.
Minton at its best, I suppose.
Unreal. Well, let's talk about that then, like the standard of luxury that people could enjoy. I mean, I'm seeing what looks like bathtubs here.
Yes, so again, something you would never see on any other mercantile vessel of this period, and even in later periods, smaller liners and warships across the board. Your very senior admirals and captains have bathtubs, even in the 1890s. But junior officers still have these little wash basins that are hung from the ceiling of their cabin and brought down when they want to use them. And many travellers by sea in Brunel's day would have regarded a wash basin or a wash stand in your cabin, as they've got here, as more than adequate. In fact, it would be a bit of a luxury. But as you say, here we have baths, and you've got piping feeding into them, so you've got water that can be pumped straight in. None of this business of carrying jugfuls, having to heat it up and then put it in there. So you've got this amazing level of luxury, and I think overall the allocation of space was not too different. It was pretty standardized, but you had decent cabins with berths. You can see the wash stands there. This is the communal dining area, and this is the bit we would have been looking into on the longitudinal plan because they cut down the centre line of the ship. So that's probably either a drinks table or a servery of some kind. You've got what are communal mess tables, but I imagine they would have been a bit nicer than that. So they've shown the bare wood on these, but you could cover them with a tablecloth.
Probably like heavily varnished as well.
Oh, I expect so, yes, and only the best. And of course the tiling, they've left nothing to the imagination with the tiling.
Interestingly, quite small uptakes for the funnels, and
Yes.
not like the big rectangular units that you'd get on later ships. But I wonder, have you ever come across anything that said that it would have got quite warm, I would assume?
It would have done, and of course they didn't have the sort of insulation that you have in later periods. So you can see to a degree they've been built around. They've got that very fine layer of edging, which suggests it's probably wood panelling with, I'm not entirely sure what they would have put behind it to try and mitigate that problem. But you're right, it would have been a very warm space, and inescapably so, because you're only one deck above the paddle machinery, and you've got the boilers below that. So there's going to be a lot of heat coming up through the ship anyway, which is probably lovely if you're in the North Atlantic. But as soon as you get to the South Atlantic or the Mediterranean or even Far Eastern waters, it's going to start becoming a bit of a pain.
Australia would be, Melbourne on a hot day would be an interesting proposition.
I imagine they would have been wilting, and with the iron requirements of Victorian dress codes, where the men have to go around with their frock coats and their bows in, and the poor ladies.
Had a load of melted passengers on the way. Yeah. The drawing itself, I mean, is pretty remarkable. So you said these are copies of the original drawings, is that right?
Yeah. So these are Denny's reinterpretation of the original drawings, and it would have been a fairly, I don't want to insult him by saying a fairly simple matter for their draftsman to have done this, because he's really just transferring information from one sheet to another. But I know that massively belittles the gorgeous work he has done here. But yes, Denny wanted their own copies of these. We still don't quite know what the exact purpose was, other than display and a sense of history and also a bit of advertising. So I think Brunel's concept of this ship was very much the case that when you were living below decks, you stayed in a nice comfortable area and you wouldn't really venture into these bits. If you wanted your perambulating space, this ship had an absolutely gigantic weather deck that you could, you'd certainly get your steps in doing 3 rounds of the deck.
These plans, the actual sheets themselves, are really at the intersection of art and engineering. And today, they're absolutely priceless. When I asked Andrew what he thought the entire collection might be worth, he summed it up best when he quoted Saladin from Kingdom of Heaven: everything and nothing.
When it comes to handling and working with ship's plans, I'll start with the benefits. You do build up your arms a bit after a while, because the scale to which the plans are drawn, and particularly British plans, mean that you're dealing with plans that are 15 feet long, often larger, and when they're rolled up with half a dozen other plans, there's quite a bit of weight to them. But I will say that as long as they're in good condition, they present surprisingly few challenges. They tend to be very hardy. The highest quality ones are drawn on very good cartridge paper with linen backing. So they were designed to endure, and it's not surprising. Quite a lot of these were intended to go down to shipyards where they'd have teacups rested on them, oil splashed over them, all sorts of other horrible things. You can always tell when you unroll a plan for the first time whether it's the shipyard copy or the office copy, because the office copies are beautifully pristine and the shipyard copies are just disgusting, in a nice way. Very often you will find that a plan has been sent up and it's been beautifully drawn, lovingly illustrated, and their bosses or their lordships, if it's the Board of Admiralty, will spend some time discussing the drawing. There'll be little suspicious stains that hint at tea on the plan where they've just left their cups and saucers on it. There'll be pencil scribblings all over this beautiful illustration. And as a draftsman, I'd have thought that must hurt a bit, where you've sent up this gorgeous thing that matches the original specification and it comes back with an angry red penciled arrow going, don't like this mast here, move it 6 feet back, please. You go, oh, no. But for us, they're an absolute joy. You do get some horror stories in there, but ironically, it's not so much the 19th and early 20th century that's the problem. It's more the mid-20th century onwards, because every shipyard and the Royal Navy, they discover the joys of acetate, which at the time seems to solve so many problems. It's cheap, it's easy to make mass-produced copies from. There's so much to recommend it, but as many people I'm sure who've handled this kind of material will know, it deteriorates horrendously. It darkens, it gives off an awful smell. And worst of all, there's nothing you can do to stabilize them in the long term. You can slow down the process of deterioration, but between the nature of acetate itself and some of the chemical-based inks that begin to eat the paper around them, you're looking at a bit of a minor conservation crisis. Whereas when you go back to the period that Great Eastern's designed, you've got all natural materials. They use very high quality drawing supplies. So as long as these things are well looked after, they will last. Generally speaking, I would say handling the plans is a joy. You always have to be a bit careful. You do sometimes have overeager visitors, and I completely understand this. I remember my first visit to this archive when it was as a researcher rather than an employee. And these things are unrolled in front of you and you just want to go, oh my goodness, that's amazing. And just, put your hands on it and handle them. But then you have to remember what they are. And as you say, how old they are as well, because not all of them show their age.
The ship did not have a happy career. Despite all of this. Was she too ambitious for the time? Do you think Brunel reached too far, or it was just that, to my mind, the infrastructure to support a ship of this size didn't yet exist?
I think that's a very fair comment. I hesitate to call this ship a failure. If she had sunk as a result of that catastrophic explosion that she suffered quite early on in her career, then yes, write her off as a failure. But I think you are absolutely right, though. He was reaching too far ahead of his time. He was probably drawn too much to the lure of the achievement without thinking of what was happening around it. And at the end of the day, genius though this concept is, and incredible that they built it, the iron dictates of finance, of logistics, they just come and take over. And it's rather sad, really, that although they're far less comfortable and they have to keep stopping and would take so much longer to get to Australia than Great Eastern would, the humble migrant passenger ship is the one that wins the day in the end, simply because financially this monster is unworkable. And even with the best will in the world, I think the experience of getting out to Australia at one go without being able to step ashore every now and then would probably drive people a bit bonkers. It's a long time to be at sea, and it's a very expensive ship to run. And if something does go wrong, and things did occasionally go wrong, it's an awful expense to fix, especially when there's no dockyard that can take you. If you accidentally make a hole in your ship's bottom, then if you're close enough, you probably have to come back to Britain to try and sort that out. So there's an awful lot militating against this ship being a successful passenger vessel for the Australia run. And I cannot imagine, even if you packed her with the well-to-do, who would probably expect a higher standard of living for what they were paying, you wouldn't make enough to keep the ship running. She would be at a bit of a loss. And she does join a whole pantheon of other forms of transport where something incredible has been tried and it just doesn't deliver enough of a return. I suppose airships are a comparable example where, even the most successful of them, you still rely on a tiny number of paying passengers and a lot of overpriced mail in order to make the thing pay for itself. So you're never going to cash in on the mass market there.
I'd wager the other thing that she has going against her is she doesn't have a running mate. And financially speaking, I mean, that's a nightmare, because I suppose it was figured out later that having two ships similarly sized, or three ships ideally, working the same route is how you're maximizing profits. And to have this one-off, I know that Cunard had a real problem after the 20s because their fleet was totally mismatched. You had Lusitania that had sunk, and they were just left with Mauritania, the German Berengaria, which was massive, and a selection of smaller ships, and it didn't quite work. And so having this one-off, freak, giant, luxurious ship that, if something goes wrong, you're not making money at all.
No. And if the repairs take months or, God forbid, over a year, then she's just sitting there and you're just paying for her and nothing's coming in. Even future bookings can't offset that. But then I suppose the flip side of that is if you give her a job to do where it only requires one ship that discovers she has an amazing specialization and an aptitude for, like, cable laying, then all of a sudden you have a winner. And when you factor out the need to look after a large number of passengers, you don't need as many crew as you'd think to keep this vessel ticking over as a cable layer, and you don't need any hospitality staff either, so all that saves your costs. And unlike the passenger run, you can lay cables at a fairly economical speed. So I am very happy that Great Eastern found a very successful, if largely unsung, niche. I don't know whether you would call her the last phase of her life a success, when she ends up being that giant advertising billboard, and it seems a sad end for such an ambitious dream, but it's still a use life of sorts.
Seeing the skill actually on display by the people who made these amazing feats is humbling, and you can't help but feel a little melancholy that expedience and efficiency have rendered these kinds of ostentatious, detailed drawings just a relic of the past. But working with them and studying them reveals some secrets of the people that made them, and the stories of their lives as useful technical drawings.
I don't think a month goes by where something doesn't turn up that surprises me. Very often it's a particular detail on a plan, and it could be something incredibly niche where you look at it and you go, oh, I didn't realize they did that. And it might be some very obscure alteration to a particular ship in a very large class. And most of the established histories will make no record of this thing because it is the only vessel affected by this alteration. I'm also sometimes surprised at the moments when draftsmen will break through their professional veneer, and if they get bored, they sometimes do silly things. So no less a famous vessel than the battlecruiser Renown. One of her compass platforms amidships, the structure was in a particular shape, which obviously reminded the draftsman of something. And so he drew a face in one of the windows and added little wheels and wrote Ford by the side of it. Now, it was done in pencil. He clearly forgot to erase it, but it's been immortalized for all time. Other times, it's the bits of correspondence that are associated with a plan where a captain will say, I don't like where my galley is placed. It's too far away. My food is cold by the time it gets to my table. Can something be done about this? To which their lordships will probably say, no, I'm sorry, get a life. We've got a navy to run. Or words to that effect. And you see it in both the mercantile and the naval side of things. Sometimes you will just open up a plan that wows you completely. So, I mean, obviously for beauty, we've got the amazing Great Eastern plans that we'll look at shortly. We've also got odds and ends, and there's one, a vessel called the Persia, and that was drawn roughly contemporary to the Great Eastern plans we have. And it was submitted for a trade fair, but the person who drew the Persia plan decided he would really knock himself out with additional decoration. I've seen nothing like Persia, and when I opened that drawing, I just thought, oh my goodness, I'm not sure if I'm looking at a plan or a work of art. The third surprising element, I'd say, is sometimes the stories that the plans link into, and there are some incredible maritime stories out there. One of my favourites is the slightly dodgy period when a number of British yards were building vessels for the Confederate States of America. So you get these suspiciously fast merchant vessels that fit the bill of a blockade runner very well, but of course there's nothing to give them away. But the most overt one we have is when lairds of Liverpool decided they would be a little bit naughty and start building a couple of turreted ironclads for the Confederate States. We have those drawings here, and these ironclads are shown in beautiful detail, but they also carry their fake Egyptian names of El Monasir and El Toussaint, because quite understandably, if lairds had put their Confederate names down, there would have been a bit of diplomatic bother, let's say.
Being one of the preeminent maritime museums and collections in the world, the Royal Museums Greenwich team is conscious of the important role that they play in keeping the memory of these incredible pioneers alive. It's part of our story as a society. In the 21st century, we get to benefit almost every day from the breakthroughs that were being made on paper in nearly every single one of these special pages.
So we're very conscious of our responsibility to the million and a bit plans that we have in this collection. Nobody knows the exact figure because we're still cataloguing our way through it. We hope in the future that we will successfully preserve and protect as much of this unique collection as possible. And the ultimate goal, and I am talking decades in the future, we want the collection to be as accessible to researchers, not just within Britain, but globally, because it's such an important collection for Britain, but it's also part of this larger global maritime story. And that's really just a function of how important Britain's part in this worldwide human story of traveling across the seas and trading across the seas, and yes, fighting across seas is. So there are various ways that we're approaching this. One obviously is cataloguing. You don't know what you've got until you've catalogued it. So we are halfway, perhaps, through a process, and I'm probably being a bit optimistic with halfway, but we're getting there. One day we would like every individual plan in the collection, from the mightiest general arrangement down to the humblest nuts and bolts plan, to have its own record, to be linked to its parent vessel, to be linked to its shipyard. We would one day like all these to be very easily findable. And if we possibly can manage it, it seems such a difficult job logistically now. If we could digitize all of these, that would be incredible. We have digitized the Sailing Navy collection in its entirety. We were able to do that because it was easy to fund. It's a very tiny collection. It numbers about 8,000 plans. So against the larger backdrop, I realize I've misused the word tiny there, but relatively speaking, it's a tiny collection. But because of the vast scale of some of the other collections, Denny of Dumbarton's, for example, which runs into many tens of thousands of drawings, it's simply too big to do at one go. So a lot of our digitization is done reactively now to researcher requests. But although I won't live to see it, I confidently hope that one day all those digitized plans will be out there for researchers to benefit from. And that is my hope for the future.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing these with us.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much.
For now, I had to leave the plans archive, although you all know I could have easily stayed there for an entire week. But that's not the last we'll hear from Andrew, his team, and their incredible collection. Next time I'm in London, we'll meet again and show you some more of these brilliant pieces of art. In fact, Andrew rolled out his favourite drawings in the collection, Cunard's Persia of 1856. The sheer artistry and detail on these outstrips even that of the Great Eastern drawings. If you'd like to follow Andrew and his work, you can find him on Instagram at Andrew Chung RMG. And of course, if you get the chance, be sure to visit Royal Museums Greenwich in London to see just some of their amazing artifacts. Until the next time I get to visit, I guess I'll just be practicing my drawing skills.